program. We're really pleased today to have the two speakers who are with us, Ashish Kapoor and Jim Bingle. They both are from the Piedmont Environmental Council and are doing a tremendous amount of work, actually leading the charge about data centers in Loudoun County and around the state. Ashish's topic today will be challenges and solutions for Virginia's clean energy future. Ashish joined the Piedmont Environmental Council in March of 2023 as the Senior Energy and Climate Policy Analyst. In his role, he works with land use and policy staff to represent the organization on energy matters at the local, regional, and state levels. He grew up in Western Pennsylvania and New Jersey, graduated from Pennsylvania State University Schreyer Honors College with bachelor's in economics and political science, and subsequently received a JD from Rutgers School of Law in Newark, New Jersey. During and after law school, Ashish worked as a public policy attorney on a variety of issues, including environmental and social justice in the U.S. and abroad. Most recently, he worked as a national solar consultant at Sunrun, the nation's largest residential solar company. And Jim Bingle, the title of her talk will be Economic Resilience and Loudoun's Data Center Dependency. Jim has been a field representative at the Piedmont Environmental Council since 1998 and covers land use and transportation issues in Loudoun County. Her focus is on helping citizens make a positive impact on their communities. Citizen activism, born out of her independent study master's program, initially drew Jim to PEC. She helped form and support Sustainable Loudoun Network and two Leesburg grassroots groups. In addition to grassroots networking and general land use issues, she focuses on water quality and wetlands and includes local foods and sustainable family farming in her special interest. Jim has served on several watershed and water resource committees over the years and has also been a volunteer stream monitor since 1997. Jim has a master's degree in environmental education and eco-psychology with an undergraduate degree in psychology. And very importantly, Jim is also chair of the Loudoun County Environmental Commission, where she is doing tremendous work on the county's environmental and energy work plan. And I'm Jean Wright, chair of the Friends Acting for Climate Today group, co-sponsoring this program with the Science and Faith group. So let us welcome Ashish and Jim, and let's begin our program. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Jean, and nice to see everybody here today. We'll go ahead and get started. Is 12 o'clock the end time for this event? Okay, so we'll get cracking. So we'll be talking about challenges and solutions for Virginia's clean energy future, and then in between my presentation, Jem will speak about data centers. So, kind of high level, the energy transition right now in Virginia is going on pretty much full force, and we'll talk about that nationally and regionally. Data center demand and its impact on our clean energy goals, potential solar solutions, and some newer technologies. So just real quick, kind of energy talk, I might be using some of these terms. So 1,000 kilowatts, that's 1 megawatt of energy. One data center typically uses about 50 to 100 megawatts. 1,000 megawatts is 1 gigawatt. Sort of the energy peak load of Virginia is around 24, 25 gigawatts right now. Kilowatt hours, gigawatt hours, megawatt hours, that's the amount of energy that's produced from the power plant, the solar farm, etc. Here in this diagram, you can see kind of just the high-level kind of version of how everything works. The power plant produces the energy. It goes through a transformer that steps up the voltage. That goes through your 500 kV lines or whatever your transmission lines are. Then that goes to the step-down transformer and goes into your distribution lines, into your community, into your homes. And so we're all part of a greater grid that's known as PJM. PJM really stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, but it's now expanded. It's all the way from Illinois to Virginia, up to Jersey, and down to parts of North Carolina. So we're all part of that, and technically we can get our energy from any portion of that grid. So right now we need to get 100% of our energy from renewables by 2050. Starting from 2025, 75% of that energy needs to be from Virginia. So right now, Dominion or Appalachian Power can purchase their energy, renewable energy, from other states that are within this PJM grid that I mentioned. But 2025, it's going to have to be 75% from Virginia. So the peak load is the amount of energy that is used. In like previous years, peak load was the amount of energy that Virginia needed. 6% of that can be distributed statutorily. So distributed generation, that's your rooftop solar. That's really any sort of energy that you create and then use near the point of its creation. So larger distributed systems typically tends to be solar, but it can also be a geothermal system can also be a distributed system. So that's right now capped at 6%. So that's the state level. Regionally, we're part of RGGI, or have been part of RGGI, I should say. That's a regional greenhouse gas initiative. So this is a market-based cooperation amongst 12 states. Virginia joined it a few years back, but it's been around for about 20 years, has been very effective in reducing CO2 levels by about 50% in the region. So it uses kind of a stepped up restriction year by year, and then carbon emitters need to buy the right to emit CO2, and then the cost of that emission goes up as time goes on, and those auctions to sell those certificates generate revenue that can then be used within state level programs. So that funds really climate resilience programs, so energy efficiency and flood resilience. It's given Virginia about $600 million. But unfortunately, the Air Pollution Board voted for us to extricate Virginia from RGGI, and that's now being litigated in the courts, and we should have some resolution by the end of the year. But numerous conservancy groups are resisting the right of the Pollution Control Board to be able to take us out of RGGI. So that remains a little bit in flux. And then down on the bottom there, nationally, of course, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. That initially started as $400 billion influx for everything from tax credits on EV chargers, batteries, solar panel systems, EV vehicles, energy efficiency. Because of its popularity now, Goldman Sachs said that number might actually reach $1.2 trillion in energy incentives. So challenges to reaching those clean energy goals that we have for 2050, we're going to focus on two. One is data center demand, and the other is the PJM interconnection queue. That's basically the line for solar systems, power plants, et cetera, to join the energy grid. This is a map of PJM. So again, you can see where it stretches, but Virginia is mainly Dominion territory in the pink, and then Appalachian Power is most of the southwest of the state. So these are different members of the PJM grid. This is PEPCO. So you can see this graph. This is basically PEPCO as the electric company puts out a prediction for where they see demand heading. Last year's estimate is the green line, and you can see it's pretty flat, if not going down. The blue is this year's forecast for the next 20 some odd years, and it's going up a little bit. This is the Mid-Atlantic utility, same type of thing. Any increase pretty much attributed to EV vehicles, but energy efficiency standards have really kind of stabilized a lot of energy demand. And this is our region. So you can see a very sharp increase predicted last year, and now that has gone up significantly more so. And that is according to both PJM and Dominion almost exclusively because of data centers. So data centers are driving Virginia's increase in demand. That's really predicting, according to Dominion, a doubling of our energy needs over the next 20 years or so. So when we think about our clean economy and clean energy goals, now there's a real demand to put double the amount of energy that's renewable into the grid. But I'll talk a little bit more about the challenges that we're seeing there. So I know many of y'all are probably aware of data centers, what they are, but just kind of real quick, they're used for outsourcing of information technology functions. Our smartphones are really run off of these data centers. Our apps, our streaming, our Hulu, Netflix, et cetera. The rollout of rural broadband has had a big impact. Internet of Things, really anything we purchase, anything we watch. Self-driving vehicles, all the algorithms that are part of these self-driving vehicles, and then increasingly and very rapidly artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that is requiring more and more data centers and more intensive uses of energy within those data centers, higher amounts of cooling mechanisms, and then again higher and higher amounts of energy needed to run those cooling systems. And then this is just a graph here that shows the regular consumption prediction over the next 25 years or so in blue. Green shows the data center demand and what a significant chunk that is expected to be. And then that smaller portion there is electric vehicle consumption. And this is just a report from PJM showing what data center growth will look like. Here, this is a chart of the data center inventory across the world. So you can see London, Tokyo, Frankfurt, Sydney, all the way through, Paris and Chicago. Northern Virginia, they're just dwarfing even the next in line, London there. So vast majority of the internet, 70% of the internet functions come through Northern Virginia. And this is a chart. You can see the range of companies that are here, the big players, your Microsoft, AWS, Google, but numerous banks, tech companies, and so forth are really one of the many hundreds of companies that are here. So that has, in addition to the energy impacts that are required from these data centers, it's also going to have transmission impacts. PJM currently is undergoing a process called TEAC. So they're evaluating about 72 different transmission line proposals throughout our region, many of them coming through the Northern Virginia and Loudoun County area. So that is an evaluation process that will be next meeting will be August 31st, next week. And then the issue is resolved in December, where they'll decide which proposals that they will decide on. But it's going to be a lot of new projects and a significant amount of transmission. And again, transmission costs, the costs of these lines, which could extend into close to $100 billion, that's paid for by us. That's paid for by the ratepayers. And then last thing I'll mention before passing it to Jem is, why data centers here in this region. A lot of that has to do with both this cable map and all of the lines and fiber optic cables coming into the region. And then within this region, 25, 30 years ago, a lot of fiber optic cable was laid down, and that provided the backbone and the infrastructure for the data center industry that we see now. And then, of course, that has created a whole sort of ecosystem of data centers that feeds itself. So numerous reasons why we see them, and one of the reasons that we see more of them is also their contribution to the tax base, and I'll let Jem speak on that.
So, yes, what does this mean for Loudoun County? We've got a lot of data centers, and the county has definitely benefited from data centers. I'm going to give you a little background first. In 2008, when the county was really starting to see data centers expand, we started getting them here, applications for data centers. The county was dealing with housing boom. And that housing boom had a definite negative impact on our bottom line for the budget because very few residential units pay for themselves in terms of the cost of the services that they require, particularly schools. So we were dealing with that, and data centers were like manna from heaven, really, because they really addressed a lot of the problems that the county was facing. Now, 60% of county spending relies on data center revenues. And in this fiscal year, those revenues account for more than 30% of the taxes collected by the county. And if this pace continues, which we see that it probably will, then by 2030, 50% of our revenues could come from data centers. So, hey, what's wrong with that? Well, as those of you who have to deal with a budget at any time might consider, that too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, actually. One thing that's really important to know is that opposed to our residential and other business revenues, where the taxes are basically based on your real estate, the land, for data centers, most of the revenue to the county comes from the equipment that gets taxed inside of the buildings, so the servers, as an example. And the way that the county taxes that equipment is on a depreciating 4-year cycle. So when they reach that end of the 4-year cycle, you might think, okay, now it's going to be sort of static at that level, but data center companies are constantly renewing their equipment, trying to keep up. And so that goes back up. But it's a predictable sort of cycle that the county you would think that the county could sort of just rely on that. However, there are other things that affect the actual revenues collected. And I'll give you 3 examples. During the pandemic, it hit everybody, right? For a variety of reasons, equipment that would normally be replaced wasn't replaced. And what happened was the county experienced a $60 million shortfall in the budget. We also know that not all data centers that are built are immediately utilized. So as long as there's no equipment in the building, all they're paying for is their real estate taxes. And it can be some time before those buildings actually see equipment in them. And on top of that, the way that the equipment is taxed is it's not taxed until January of the following year. So when that equipment gets installed in a building would affect how much the taxes are actually collected. So as the county gets a better grip on these factors, their projections have changed. And the current projections for the 24 to 26 year time frame is $500 million less than it was 2 years ago. Okay, so when things are good, you can kind of relax and not think about risk, right? Well, that's true. And our current spending has sort of been an evolution of that relaxation. Now we're spending more than, in terms of our relative growth of spending, is more than our population growth has been. So they're not actually balanced. And it's important to think forward as you're planning for all contingencies and risks. So Loudoun has also, as a result of this, and we're all appreciative, they've kept the residential tax rate artificially low. But what happens if there is some sort of an economic downturn or things change in the data center industry? Well, it could mean a spike in residential taxes to cover our needs. So one thing that we see is that we have been approving a lot of residential development recently, and we want the affordable housing. We need that in Loudoun. However, it does mean that our cost of capital infrastructure is also going to be expanding, so the projections are expected to double from the 2019 to 2023 projections versus the 24 to 28 capital improvement plan. And allowing more data centers has other tax implications as well. The more data centers that we have, the higher the land values are. So in eastern Loudoun County, the cost per acre of an acre of land is in the $3 million range, I believe. So not many businesses can afford that kind of rate, which means that they're not in the county. They have to go somewhere else to, especially the smaller businesses and the service businesses. So that's one way that it affects things. And then we have to provide energy infrastructure, transmission lines, substations. Those all go right hand in hand with data centers. That means that Dominion also has to pay for that land to put those facilities on. So we end up paying as ratepayers as well. So what can we do? First of all, a little slower rate of growth would be helpful to avoid future crises. And one thing that the county has been trying to do is, where do we put these data centers? Unfortunately, when we thought, hey, these are wonderful, and we really didn't, nobody really understood, maybe the data centers did in Dominion, but our local leaders didn't really understand the side effects of data centers. So we said, okay, you can be by right everywhere. By right means you don't have to go through a legislative process to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. You can build, as long as it says you can build by right in this district, you can do it. So we allowed it everywhere, and now we're feeling the impacts because when the Board of Supervisors says, well, we don't want all these data centers, they can't stop it, except for some changes that they are trying to make right now. But before I go there, I should say that it's important for us not to expand where data centers are allowed. So I don't know, there are parts of the county, 4 parts of the county, the suburban policy area, the rural, the transition, and our urban. And we definitely don't want to expand data center approvals into the transition policy area or the rural, because that really opens the door, and we don't need that. We also want to encourage more diversity of businesses, so sort of curtailing data center development will help to bring land prices down in areas where they aren't allowed. So, and then also increasing our fiscal risk assessments will be really important for the county to do. So, on that topic, recognizing the risks that have now become apparent, staff have proposed a revenue stabilization fund. Currently, it's limited to 10%, which equals $73 million, and it would grow to 80 to 85 million. But it really needs to be increased to offset any future miscalculations, because as the budget amount of data centers grow, the risk grows. So we expect that there's going to be more discussion on this topic toward the year end before the Board of Supervisors adopts this, this fund. And the other thing that they're doing right now is to change, during the zoning ordinance rewrite, which is a very technical but very necessary document and set of regulations that basically helps to implement what we see as our vision for the county's future in the comprehensive plan. So right now what the board members are trying to do is limit data center by right development, and say at a minimum you have to go through an additional process called a special exception process. But in the future, as soon as this zoning ordinance stuff is done, what they're going to do is, or they want to do, and we expect it to happen at the end of the year, is they're bringing in a consultant to say, okay, what do we need to do in our comprehensive plan to show that we're not just data center everywhere. They would do that step first, and then they would make additional changes to the zoning ordinance to include environmental protections as well. Because if those things don't exist in the comprehensive plan, basically staff has said, you're putting yourself at risk to start regulating more intensely. You have to have the basis first and then make that kind of regulation, or else we may be open to lawsuits. So we don't want that. So we also really need to have a frank community discussion about the risks. We don't need surprise announcements, and the data center industry should be a part of that. Frankly, they've been busy just trying to keep up, and they operate for competition reasons in a lot of secrecy. They don't share a lot of information as they're going forward. But we need that kind of conversation. We need to engage in partnerships for environmental improvements and sustainability. So data centers can participate with those partnerships. And I will say, as Jean mentioned, I am the chair of the county's environmental commission, and we're exploring a variety of ways that we could have partnerships for environmental improvements and sustainability. And the county just brought on a new staff person who's going to be managing the county's energy strategy and also being a liaison for our environmental commission. So we hope that there's going to be more attention and more involvement with the data center industry itself to talk about what kinds of changes they could make that would help their bottom line, frankly. Energy efficiency is helpful to everybody. And so what else can be done on their end, as well as us working with the community at large. So I will say, I'll invite you to come to our meetings or drop in electronically. That is possible. If you send I can tell you later. But anyway, and then think about what kind of partnerships maybe that you would like to participate in, because we welcome everybody to get involved. And then, whoops. Sorry. That's it. Yes. So I'm going to pass it back to Ashish.
Great. Thanks so much, Jem. And then this slide here is so currently in Loudoun County, we have about 30 million square feet of data centers. And then these are just some approvals that we pulled. So basically things that have been recently approved or applications for data centers throughout Loudoun, Prince William, Fauquier, Culpeper, Stafford, Spotsylvania, King George. So you can see each county, I mean, we're looking at additional potential 30 million in Loudoun, and then, and so forth, with Prince William potentially approving the largest data center complex in the world with the Gateway project. So the second part that I had mentioned in terms of the challenges to the sort of clean energy goals and clean economy goals is the PJM, the capacity in the queue. So PJM collectively has about 150 gigawatts of solar that's sort of just sitting there waiting to join the queue. And these can be speculative projects, they can be projects ready to go online relatively soon, but there is about 5 to 7 year wait for a project from beginning to getting connected to the queue. So in Virginia itself, that's about 35 gigawatts. Tremendous amount of energy, greater than our peak load right now, is waiting in that interconnection process. So there has been a little bit of a potential shift there at the end of last year. FERC and PJM basically announced a way to study proposals. Typically the way that it's done is the first person joining in a certain area, the first developer, has to cover a lot of the interconnection costs. These can be significant, hundreds of thousands, sometimes $1 million upgrades. And if that project goes sideways, then everybody else within that area, their project is affected. So that's one of the inefficiencies in the project process. So now those will be looked at as a cluster, and if that sort of is efficient, then we're looking at 2026 until we clear the backlog of projects, and then we'll start looking at projects that join the queue going back to October of 2021. So that really shows how jammed up that queue is, and one of the greatest problems with that is the demand from data centers is now, and so that means Chesterfield is now looking at building a 400 megawatt natural gas peaker plant. There's coal plants like Clover that were supposed to go offline, statutorily supposed to be taken off. Now they're going to end up remaining online. So more coal staying online, more natural gas is both staying online and coming online, and a big reason is that disconnect between the demand and the PJM queue. Dominion released a series of plans. It's called the Integrated Resource Plan. So basically, it's an indicator of where energy demand is headed and a sort of signifier to buyers of electricity. These are sort of various plans that we're thinking. All of them show a delay in the retirement of fossil fuel sources, anywhere between 1 to 3 gigawatts of gas, fracked gas added. And then all of them include this small nuclear generator, SMR, really still somewhat speculative whether it's a viable technology and still about 10 years out. These are smaller nuclear reactors, and the plan for the state is to put these near data centers so data centers can have consistent nuclear energy with many of the sort of waste management, nuclear waste management issues that come with that. Again, very expensive still. It needs to really be scaled up, and it still would be more expensive than solar. So not saying that it's not potentially some part of the solution in some form, but a lot is hinging on this technology that really hasn't been proven yet. And then out-of-state power, we'll have to kind of fill in the demand gaps with, other power, coal power, gas power coming in from Ohio and Pennsylvania. So we're looking at between $100 and $200 billion of new generation cost and the transmission costs, all of which, again, as Jem also mentioned, paid for by the ratepayer. So this plan is really estimating a doubling of our utility bills and our electric bills as a result of all of these upgrades. So solutions for the clean energy side of things, utility scale solar is and will be a part of that process. PEC as an organization, we recognize that, but we also believe in well-sited facilities and those that do the best they can to mitigate impacts. And we're part of the HB 206 process going on right now, and that's a lot of stakeholders, both from conservancy organizations all the way to Dominion and the solar industry, really hashing out what regulations should come from the state level for mitigation of land and really protecting our resources. So any project that affects more than 50 acres of forest or 10 acres of prime agricultural soil will need to be held to these regulations that should be implemented by the end of next year. But here you can see a map of projects all over the state. Again, 1 megawatt of power. As I said, these data centers are using about anywhere from 50 to 100. 1 megawatt of power requires 7 to 10 acres of solar. So it does have a large land impact. When cumulatively we look at it, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of acres of solar, and some estimates show more than 1 million acres to really reach the demands that are now coming. This is Chesapeake Bay Conservancy, does a kind of artificial intelligence mapping to show, basically looks at where projects have gone and predicting where they will go. And you can see really Virginia is really lit up, like a Christmas tree in terms of the likelihood of projects coming throughout the Commonwealth. Best practices. So we want to protect historical, cultural, and scenic resources. Again, minimizing impacts to prime ag and forested land, wildlife, and then water quality as well. There's tremendous amounts of runoff from these facilities, so making sure that we're mitigating against that and minimizing runoff into the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and minimizing grading processes. Construction processes really is where a lot of the compaction of the soil happens, and some of these sites are 500, 600, 700 acres. So minimizing the amount of grading and minimizing the amount of compaction can at least help have the land have some viability once the project is decommissioned 25, 40 years down the line. So just a summary of that is a big portion of the solar future in Virginia. Following best practices is going to be imperative to protect the land. Data center demand in of itself will require hundreds of thousands of acres of solar, and negatively being affected by that interconnection backlog. So last thing I'll touch upon is the distributed generation side of things. Collectively, all of these solutions, with the comprehensive energy policy, which we would love to see, can really make a significant positive impact, both on mitigating the amount of large-scale solar processes that we need, and then also connecting renewable energy to the grid more quickly, so it's not jammed up in the interconnection queue. A distributed project doesn't need to go through that greater PJM process. It connects directly to the grid, so you're not looking at that 5 to 7 year timeline. So, that's rooftop, that's community solar, brownfields, commercial solar, parking lot, and then I'll touch upon batteries a little bit as well. So challenges of the distributed generation is there's always a changing policy environment that can either encourage or discourage distributed generation. Often requires a 5 to 7 year return on investment if you're purchasing the system. And then, like anything else these days, labor challenges and supply chain can have a negative impact, although the industry is starting to recover from those impacts. The benefits are it's distribution based, so it's created and then used primarily in the location it's created, so you lessen both the need for transmission and the inefficiency of transmission. Typically, line loss is 6 to 7% of energy when you're transmitting it across high tension wires. So you're minimizing that impact. And then when you pair it with a battery backup system, you have both, energy independence, but you also have the ability to do something called load shifting, which some states are starting to do. So you can basically use folks' batteries from their systems and use and pull a certain amount of energy, compensate them for it, and help reach our peak load demand. So when the data centers are humming, everybody's AC is on, and the demand is highest for energy, then you incentivize people to discharge some of their batteries and contribute to the grid, as opposed to needing another gas plant in Chesterfield or so forth to accommodate for that demand. This is just a screenshot of potential rooftop solar capacity. Through rooftop solar and commercial rooftop solar, we'd be able to get around 1/4 of Virginia's energy if we put it on 80% of those roofs. So it won't solve the entire problem, but a sort of robust state level program that encourages solar can really at least take a nice important chunk out of it, which is particularly important in the short term. For those folks that cannot put solar on their homes or on their facilities, community solar is a great option. If you have a shared roof or an old roof or shading due to trees and so forth, you can kind of buy into a community solar 5 megawatt installation, and this is something I could talk more about, but it's sort of being litigated right now within the SEC because Dominion has sort of actively discouraged these projects because of all of the requirements required for interconnection studies. But ideally, this would be a way for folks that don't have that ability to get solar to buy in to a community solar farm and have less land impact and still get it from a distributed source. I'll skip over that in the interest of time and just briefly touch upon brownfields. There are really thousands of sites available. These are, capped landfills. These are old, spots in which some sort of manufacturing was done, and the soil has varying levels of contamination. There's mitigation processes, and there's processes within Department of Environmental Quality now that can really allow developers to come in and put up solar projects that are smaller in size, but again are not impacting ag land and forests, but putting these on land that's already been impacted environmentally. And then lastly, parking lot solar, another way to really take advantage of land that's already been impacted. It's more efficient. This is a shot of a facility at Rutgers, actually. That's, I believe, 8 megawatts. So you put up these canopies. It's a little more expensive than regular solar. It's about 50 to 100% more because of the steel and the concrete needed to elevate the panels. But again, whatever we prioritize, we can assign cost to. So if we prioritize the ag land and forest land and put a cost impact on that land, then we can thus incentivize these types of systems, and we'd love to see more parking lot solar in the Commonwealth. You know, throughout the United States, if we put parking lot solar high-end estimate, we'd be able to get 800 gigawatts of energy, you know, probably around a third of what we need. But even a conservative estimate could get about half of that. So a lot of potential. Challenges, as I said, you know, longer return on investment because it's more expensive. And then in the Commonwealth, we need a little bit more information on site viability and sort of all of the complexities on who owns that parking lot, you know, its connection viability and zoning restrictions. But the advantages, lots of parking, the environmental impact's already been made. Rather than that 1 megawatt for 7 to 10 acres, you really have 1 megawatt on 2 acres. It's a lot more concentrated. You don't have the same mitigation required. And then, you know, kind of smaller benefits. You can get shading for customers. Folks can charge their cars while they're inside somewhere shopping. There is the PPA option. That's the power purchase agreement. So you don't need to invest a tremendous amount of energy or money, rather, into getting the system built. The developer will purchase the system. Then you'll sign a contract with them to buy that energy over time. Longer term, you don't save as much with PPAs, but they are a good way if a facility or organization, government agency doesn't have the capital resources, they can engage in the PPA, which is the most popular option. And then lastly, battery backup. I talked about this a little bit with kind of load shifting. Really a big benefit to even organizations such as Ashby Ponds, where you could be able to, you know, go, if you were off grid for a week or two, you'd be able to run your system off of a combination of solar and battery. Whereas if you have just a solar system, your system shuts off because any excess energy has nowhere to go. In conjunction with batteries and that 30% incentive, it can be increasingly enticing to tie your solar system to a battery system. And then, you know, a more comprehensive state energy policy would then, again, incentivize folks to discharge that battery to the grid. And then the last thing I'll mention is virtual power plants. This is an increasingly popular technology. It's being used in states like Texas, which is having a lot of grid issues, to really maximize how and when you pull energy from people's personal batteries and from grid scale batteries. And really maximize the efficiency by twofold, and really create a granular approach to how we use people's batteries. And that's the virtual power plant. Collectively, everybody fulfills the needs of a power plant, so you don't need to have that centralized type of system anymore. And then you compensate folks. So all pieces of a puzzle, collectively speaking. I think viewing this in conjunction with an analysis and a proper study of data center, energy usage, energy efficiency, we can really have a robust state policy that helps us prevent a lot of the worst case scenarios that can come from increasing demand. So last slide is what can you do? I'll let Jem talk about the first part of this.
Okay, yes, because I always try to get people involved in their communities to make a difference. So it's important to make your voice heard. You can definitely write to the Board of Supervisors and let them know what you think about the dependency on data centers, what the board should do, what you think about the data center expansion. All of those things are really important. And I will say, I forgot to mention that we have lots of citizens involved as volunteers in different aspects of conservation, preservation, finances, looking at those things. So there's a group called the Loudoun County Preservation and Conservation Coalition. The information that I gave you on finances is as a result of a subgroup of that, a working group we call it, where I participate, but a gentleman by the name of Jim Hanna, who's a former World Banker, basically is taking his knowledge, finance experience, and looking at Loudoun County and saying, what could we offer or suggest to the county to make things better? I know that there are all kinds of backgrounds in retired people. We have a wealth of experience in our county, and so thinking about yourself as a resource and what you might be able to offer, I think is really important. The group that is here at Ashby Ponds is a great way to use your experience. And so I encourage you all to be involved, and there's a sign-in sheet if you're interested in learning more and staying informed on what PEC does. It's at the back on a table by the doors. So I'll give it back to Ashish.
Yep, and I'll just add there, reaching out to representatives, local or on the state level, and telling them, whatever portion of this plan that really moves you, more distributed generation, parking lots, rooftops, batteries. I think having some sort of state level program or local program that encourages that can really go a long way and has been shown to be very effective in getting people over that hump on whether to convert or not. And then just a more comprehensive forward-looking energy policy that we're looking at all of these interconnections. It's complicated, but some of the solutions exist now, and we don't need to look for sort of a magic bullet of SMRs or putting more carbon on the grid. There are distributed and there are sort of existing technologies, but it needs to be looked at comprehensively and encouraged at the state level. So with that, it's just thanks so much, and we'll open it up for any questions.
Thank you so much, Jim and Ashish, for giving us, excuse me, this wonderful background presentation, and then particularly solutions and what we as citizens can do. So now we invite questions from folks. So right there, and our second question, and our third question, fourth question.
That was a really wonderful presentation. Congratulations. Two comments. One, you've described the pieces of the puzzle, which is enormously complex. Okay? So to put the puzzle together, you've got to put all the pieces together that make sense. And I have two questions. One is a project underway to put all those pieces of the puzzle together? And two, there are two important aspects of the puzzle which I don't think were talked about very much. One is cost of the various solutions. You mentioned environmental cost, but I mean putting a number on it, okay? And two, large-scale nuclear is absent from that puzzle. It was not really mentioned. And there's a lot of advantages to that. For example, Sweden has pretty much abandoned renewables and going all the way for nuclear. They've got a comprehensive plan. They're going full bore for it. So my two questions is how do you, is somebody putting together the whole puzzle, including cost versus benefit? And two, how are you going, shouldn't the two big pieces of cost and large-scale nuclear be included in assembling that puzzle?
Great question, thank you. So in terms of the greater puzzle, PEC is part of the Virginia Conservation Network, and we've written papers on distributed community solar and utility scale solar. That conservation network has a sort of solar element to it with some various working groups. So all of us are sort of producing and promoting particular legislations that tie together as part of a greater policy. So one may be, a easier way to finance solar through PACE or through on-bill financing. So the utility buys the solar, and then basically you're paying a little bit of a different amount, typically less on your utility bill, and then paying for the solar rather than financing it. Parking lot solar, same thing. There's some legislation that's being worked upon we can look at some other states that have done that. Massachusetts is a good example that have created really robust incentives for larger types of distributed generation, and then also done that cost analysis to show, one, these systems tend to employ a lot more people locally, about 10 times more people than larger systems, and then two, really doing that cost analysis. You have to bring in pretty robust consulting teams to look at the exact numbers, but arriving upon the economic benefits and really placing an economic value on the environmental benefits, which is not being done. So we say this is 2 times more than utility scale solar. Again, we're not looking at what are the sort of externalized costs of utility scale solar, what are the impacts on, ag land or lost ag land, producing capacity, tourism, runoff, cleanup, et cetera. So part of that is really ascribing values to that, and that could be part of a few of the legislations that we're working upon, which is having a working group that looks at all of that, and then through stakeholders, then we arrive upon something that works for Virginia. On the nuclear side, nuclear is really the majority of our non-carbon emitting energy right now, and there is space for more reactors in North Anna and so forth. So again, it's a great way to kind of fill the base load, and I think one way or the other, renewables cannot do everything. So you do need a certain amount of, whether it be nuclear or geothermal or hydrogen, whatever that may be. That's going to have to be a part of the future. So we'll have to see where that's headed. But certainly nuclear will remain for a long time in Virginia.
Yes.
Excuse me, right here, and then John will be third. And I just want to say that we only have about 8 minutes or so for questions, which means not everyone's going to get their question answered. However, are you going to be able to stay for lunch? And so after, and we have to be out of here at 12. So afterwards, if your question hasn't been answered, you want to join us for lunch, we'll be over in Blue Ridge Clubhouse, and you're welcome to join us for lunch. Okay.
I'm curious, would a facility such as Ashby Ponds, or really any Erickson community, would it be viable to do solar battery storage on all the rooftops that we have today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was actually wondering that as I was speaking. I mean, it would certainly be worth getting. I don't know, have y'all ever looked at that?
Yes, what I have heard, I've been here a little over a year, is that it had been thought about, but the roofs are not adequate. They were built 15 years ago. Most of them are not adequate to hold solar. So that's what I've heard. I don't know about the rest of the folks.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody else has heard anything about that, but panels, some of the panels have gotten lighter and they've gotten more efficient. So, if you look 5 years ago versus now, the panels can generate 2 to 3 times more electricity from one panel, so you might need less. And then, in conjunction with some sort of battery backup, I imagine there's generators and so forth here. Mm-hmm. But, to keep the fridges running and those types of things, linking those together, it's gotten a lot cheaper. Solar keeps getting cheaper. The more we scale up, it goes down about 10-15% per year. So it's always worth another look. If y'all are motivated, I could certainly connect you with a few potential good vendors.
That would be good, Ashish, because people are motivated. So that would be good information to have. Thank you.
I was interested in, as you started out the talk of thinking about a rainy day fund, you call it the Support Revenue Stabilization Fund, which is wonderful. And clearly it should be more. I was thinking of that in context with the vote that we get from time to time about 3 or 4 bond measures for Loudoun County that come through for parks, for roads, for schools. When they look at the stabilization fund and the amount of money set aside, do they compare that with the cost that we have of issuing bonds? And how do those tie together? And maybe that's kind of a technical question, but.
Well, it is a pretty technical question, I have to say. And I don't know at this point that was something that the staff was tasked to do. The board basically gave them a set of guidelines, and staff will be coming back, I imagine, probably at the second November meeting or the first December meeting. They generally don't meet after that in December. But I would have to explore it to be able to answer your question, but I think it's a good question, and also thinking about one of the things is, how can data centers contribute in other ways? You know, should we be putting some of that money to our parks and specifically earmarking data center revenues for certain needs? I don't think that I mean, I know it's not happening now.
Is Pat our next questioner? No, we have one back there first, Pat. Thank you.
My question is,
I'm sorry.
I've been told that all the solar panels are not made in this country. Can you tell me what percentage of all these solar panels that you want to put up are going to be made here in this country and not being sold to China, bought from China?
So one of the other successes of the Inflation Reduction Act has been to really incentivize solar production within the United States. So we are seeing a rapid, increase. Hanwha panels. There's a lot of external producers and then companies like First Solar that were producing panels, but then just could not compete with the Chinese product. Now with these incentives, they're able to scale up their production more. So a lot of times with a lot of developers, you can actually request American panels because that's something that a lot of people have asked for. So I know, there's the Solarize program that we run in the Piedmont, basically has an option that if you prefer American-made solar panels, you can make that request. So, and I think batteries, same thing, will be a lot of these power walls, Tesla power walls, are increasingly made in Colorado in the United States. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's significant amount of panels are made in China, Malaysia, but we're going to see more and more made in the United States.
Quick question. You didn't mention wind. How about offshore wind and wind in the Appalachian regions, for example? You didn't factor that into the puzzle.
Yes. Yeah, good point. I need to add that. We have about 3 gigawatts of wind coming in. The project actually started last week in Virginia, and we'd love to see more of it. Unfortunately, because of the supply chain and interest rates, wind energy has gotten very expensive. But the hope is, over the long term, that will stabilize. And there's also real technology coming out for floating wind panels. So they put those up and trying those out in the Great Lakes area. Put those far enough out where they're not impacted by ice. They don't have the same requirements, like capital intensive requirements for installation. So would love to see that technology become more viable.
Thank you all so much for coming. I want to let you know our next month's program on November the 9th will be Steve Himmler, President of the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America, who will be speaking about medical studies of near-death experiences, revealing the reality of our soul, heaven, hell, and the afterlife. Now, that's a big difference from today's program, but that's what we do here. So again, thank you for coming, and if any of you want to join us for lunch, we'll be across the way at Blue Ridge, and you're very welcome to join us. Thank you all so much, and thank our speakers.